If this were written on paper, the ink would be water, the letters would be leaves, and the page would be the quiet earth upon which Lao Tzu once walked. And so the story begins, not with a shout, nor with a proclamation, but with the faintest rustle of wind moving through tall, thin reeds by the riverbank. Dawn had not yet broken. The sky was a soft gradient of darkness surrendering to a new day, and in the half-light where one could not tell dream from waking, an old man walked slowly along a narrow path. His pace was unhurried, not because his body was weak, but because his spirit refused to be rushed. Each footstep was a lesson, each breath a teaching, each moment a chapter in the book that had no beginning and no end. The Tao, Lao Tzu, carried no possessions. What he had, he needed little. What he needed, he already carried within. His robe was simple and worn, a muted shade of earth and time. His long white hair fell freely behind him, unbound like the rivers he loved. And his eyes, though aged, held the clarity of still water untouched by wind. They reflected a truth he had spent a lifetime understanding, that nothing is more powerful than what is soft, nothing more enduring than what yields. As he walked, birds stirred in the trees. The faint cry of a crane echoed in the distance, stretching the silence rather than breaking it. Lao Tzu paused and looked up at the fading stars. The Tao is silent, he whispered, but in silence, all things speak. Ahead of him, the path curved around a hill and descended into a valley where mist clung low to the ground. The world seemed draped in a veil of softness, as though every shape had surrendered its sharpness to the morning fog. To most travelers, the path might have felt lonely. To Lao Tzu, it felt complete. The valley knew him, and he knew the valley. In every step he took, there was a harmony between walker and ground, between breath and air, between being and becoming. He stopped at a small clearing where an ancient pine tree grew from the side of a weathered cliff. Its trunk was twisted by centuries of storms, yet it stood firm, tall, and patient. The old sage placed his hand against the bark. "Strength is found in bending," he murmured. "Rigidity is the way of death. The pine that survives the winter is the pine that bows before the snow." A memory floated back to him, one from many years ago, when a young disciple had asked him, "Master, why should a man ever yield? Why should he not stand firm and unmovable, like stone?" Lao Tzu had answered by pointing to a rock in the river. The water flowed around it effortlessly, wearing it down grain by grain. "To resist the world is to be eroded by it," he had said. "But to move with the world is to be carried by its current, untouched." Asterisk, asterisk, the old man smiled softly at the memory and continued on. The valley widened before him, and soon he came upon a small stream winding its way toward the river below. Its sound was delicate, like glass beads falling on silk. Lao Tzu knelt beside it, cupped his hands, and sipped the cool water. "How clear the water becomes," he observed aloud, "when nothing stirs it. And how clouded the mind becomes when we stir it with desires, judgments, and fears." A fish darted beneath the surface, then disappeared behind a cluster of rocks. The sage's eyes followed it briefly. "Be like the fish," he said. "Swim unseen. Let your life be simple. Move without leaving a trace." As he rose, the mist began to lift, revealing distant mountains, their silhouettes growing sharper as light seeped into the world. Somewhere among those mountains was the small western pass he would eventually reach, the path that would lead him away from the kingdom he had served quietly for so long. The world had grown loud, he thought, too loud for his teachings. Men chased power, They traded virtue for vanity. They filled the streets with debate and the courts with ambition. The more rules a kingdom has, he whispered, the more thieves it produces. It was not bitterness that colored his thoughts. Sit was acceptance. The Tao teaches that all things rise, flourish, decay, and fall away. Even kingdoms, even ways of life, even eras of peace. And when something has run its course, the wise do not cling. They step aside, allowing the cycle to flow on. Lao Tzu resumed his journey. The sun began to climb, but its rays remained soft, filtered through drifting clouds. The sage followed the stream until it broadened into a quiet lake reflecting the pastel sky. At its edge grew a lone willow tree, its branches cascading like threads of silk touching the water. Drawn by its beauty, Lao Tzu sat beneath it. The willow bends before the storm, he said. It survives because it does not cling to any particular shape. Its nature is to yield, and in yielding, it endures. He looked out across the lake and noticed a fisherman in a small wooden boat. The man cast his net gently, without hurry or expectation. The boat drifted quietly. The fisherman's movements were simple, almost meditative. He seemed neither eager to catch fish nor concerned about failing. Lao Tzu watched him for a long time. A man who desires nothing lacks nothing, he said, and a man who lacks nothing possesses everything. The fisherman eventually noticed the sage sitting beneath the willow and steered his boat closer. When he reached the shore, he bowed respectfully. "Old master," he said, "what brings you to these mountains?" Lao Tzu answered with a smile, "The same thing that brings you to the lake, peace." The fisherman smiled back. "Peace is rare in the villages now," he said. "People speak of new taxes, new laws, new unrest." Lao Tzu nodded. "When a ruler governs by force, the people become restless. When he governs by virtue, the people remain calm. But virtue cannot be commanded. It must be lived." The fisherman pondered this quietly. "I have only my boat," he said, "and my nets. I am not wise like the scholars. My life is simple. That is why your mind is clear," Lao Tzu said gently. "The scholar carries the burden of knowledge. The simple man carries only himself." The fisherman offered the sage a fish from his catch, but Lao Tzu declined. "To take more than I need would disturb the balance," he said. "And today, I need only the journey." The fisherman bowed again and paddled away. Lao Tzu remained under the willow for some time, savoring the stillness. Then he rose, brushed the dust from his robe, and continued walking. The path took him deeper into the valley, where the air grew cooler and the light dimmer. Tall cliffs rose on either side, their faces carved by centuries of wind and rain. The sage traced his fingers over one of the stone walls. "The Tao carves mountains without effort," he murmured. "By doing nothing, it leaves nothing undone." As he walked, he heard the faint sound of a child crying. Curious, he followed the sound until he found a young boy sitting on a rock, clutching his knee. He had fallen while gathering herbs and scraped his skin. Tears streamed down his face. Lao Tzu approached quietly. "Why do you weep, little one?" he asked. "It hurts," the boy sniffled. "Pain is the price of growth," the sage said. "A seed must break before it becomes a tree. A bone must mend itself stronger after it cracks. Even the heart must sometimes ache to learn its own strength." The boy looked up at him, confused but comforted. Lao Tzu tore a strip from the edge of his robe and wrapped it gently around the wound. "When you fall," he continued, "you learn the ground. When you rise, you learn yourself. The child nodded weakly. "Thank you, old master." "Do not thank me," Lao Tzu said. "Thank the path that taught you. And remember, the world is full of lessons for those who walk slowly." Leaving the child, the sage resumed his journey toward the western mountains. Hours passed, and the valley gradually opened into dense bamboo forests swaying like waves in a green ocean. Sunlight filtered through the tall stalks, creating patterns of gold and shadow on the forest floor. Asterisk, asterisk, Lao Tzu loved bamboo. It grew straight and tall, yet it was hollow inside, a perfect symbol of humility. He tapped one stalk lightly. "The sage empties himself," he said. "Only then can wisdom fill him." A pair of travelers soon appeared along the path. They wore fine clothing and carried scrolls beneath their arms. When they saw the old man, they whispered to each other. "That is the hermit's collar from Changzhou," one said. "The one who speaks of nothingness and water. He is said to be wise," the other replied. "But what can be learned from a man who has abandoned society?" They approached him with cautious arrogance. "Old master," one said, "we seek knowledge of governance. Tell us, how should a ruler lead his people?" Lao Tzu looked at them, his expression soft. "If you must ask how to rule," he said, "you are already unfit to rule." The men frowned. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer," Lao Tzu said. "Leadership is not a technique. It is a virtue. The greatest ruler is one the people barely know exists. When his work is done, the people say, 'We did it ourselves.'" The scholars exchanged annoyed glances. "Your words are too vague," one protested. "The Tao is vague," Lao Tzu replied. "Yet it births all things." The men muttered among themselves and walked away unimpressed. The sage watched them go with compassion rather than judgment. "The more a man seeks clarity through force," he said quietly, "the more confused he becomes. Clarity comes not from grasping, but from seeing." Further into the forest, he came upon a clearing where an elderly woman was sweeping the ground outside a small shrine. Each sweep of her broom was slow, deliberate, and peaceful. Lao Tzu approached. "Why do you sweep the ground so often?" he asked. "To keep the dust away," she answered without pausing. "But the dust will return," he said. "Why chase what cannot be kept away?" The woman smiled. "I do not sweep to keep the dust away," she said. "I sweep to keep my heart still." Lao Tzu bowed to her deeply. "Then you are wiser than many who seek to rule the world." She bowed back. "And you, old traveler, are kind to recognize wisdom in simple things." He continued on, moved by her humility. The Tao was alive in places like this, in the silent forests, in the humble shrines, in the laughter of children, in the ripples of water. It did not reside in palaces, debates, or armies. It flowed where ambition had not yet built walls. By late afternoon, the sage reached the foot of the western mountains. The path grew steeper, and the air cooler. Clouds gathered around the peaks like white scarves, drifting lazily. Lao Tzu climbed slowly, savoring each breath, each stone beneath his feet, each whisper of wind as he ascended. He recalled a time when a young prince had once asked him, "Master, how can I become immortal?" Lao Tzu had answered, "Let go of who you think you are. What remains is already immortal." Now, as he climbed the mountain trail, he whispered those words again, not to the prince, but to himself. Age had made his steps slower, but it had also brought him closer to the core of the Tao. The older he became, the less he clung to identity. The less he clung, the freer he felt. Eventually, he reached a high ridge overlooking a vast landscape of valleys, rivers, forests, and villages. The sight was breathtaking, like a scroll painted by the heavens. But what moved him most was not the beauty, but the simplicity of it all. All things follow their nature, he said. The river flows because it is a river. The mountain stands because it is a mountain. And the sage lives in peace because he follows the Tao. He continued walking until he came upon a small hermitage built against a rocky slope. A monk sat outside, grinding herbs with a stone pestle. When he saw Lao Tzu, he bowed. "Master," the monk said, "I have been waiting for you." Lao Tzu raised an eyebrow. "Waiting? You knew I would come." "The winds told me," the monk said with a gentle smile. "They said a man carrying the silence of the world would pass this way." The sage chuckled softly and sat beside him. "What is it you wish to know?" The monk hesitated. "I have studied all the teachings," he said, "yet I still feel restless. How can the mind ever be truly still?" Lao Tzu looked at the horizon. "The mind becomes still," he said, "when you stop trying to still it. A pond does not become calm by force. It becomes calm when the winds cease." "But how do I make the winds cease?" the monk asked. "You do not," Lao Tzu answered. "You simply stop stirring them." The monk's eyes widened with understanding. He bowed again, this time more deeply. "Thank you, Master." Lao Tzu rose, feeling the weight of his journey catching up to him. He continued along the ridge until he reached a narrow pass known to travelers as the Western Gate. A lone guard stood there, a gentle-faced man who had heard stories of the old sage. "Master," the guard said, "before you leave the kingdom, will you write down your teachings, so that the world may remember them?" Lao Tzu paused. He had not intended to write anything. The Tao, after all, was beyond words. To name it was to limit it. To describe it was to obscure it. Yet he sensed sincerity in the guard's request. "Very well," he said quietly. "Bring me a brush and some paper." The guard quickly fetched what he asked for. Lao Tzu sat beneath a small tree at the edge of the pass and began to write. His brush strokes were simple yet precise, flowing effortlessly like water down a mountainside. He wrote of simplicity, humility, softness, yielding, emptiness, virtue, and harmony. He wrote of the nameless origin of all things, the rhythm of heaven and earth, and the elegant power of doing nothing. He wrote not to instruct, but to remind. Hours passed, and the sky darkened into twilight. When he finished, he handed the writings to the guard. "These words are only shadows," he said. "The Tao is the light. Do not confuse the two." The guard bowed deeply. "Thank you, Master. The world will cherish your wisdom." Lao Tzu smiled. "Do not cherish it, live it." He turned and began walking westward, disappearing gradually into the mountains. The guard watched until the sage was no longer visible, then looked down at the manuscript in his hands. It would become known as the Tao Te Ching. But the old sage, having completed what he needed to do, walked on. He followed narrow trails, crossed silent ridges, slept beneath stars, and drank from mountain springs. And everywhere he went, the Tao was with him. For the Tao was not a teaching. It was not a philosophy. It was not a path. It was the space in which paths appear, the silence from which teachings arise, the presence that remains when everything else is gone. In the days that followed, Lao Jews traveled deeper into the western lands. Villages became sparse. Roads turned to footpaths. Forests yielded to high grasslands. He encountered shepherds watching their flocks, woodcutters gathering timber, and wanderers like himself. To each, he offered a few quiet words, never instruction, only reminders of the truth they already carried. To one shepherd who worried about wolves, he said, "Fear is a wolf you feed in your mind. Starve it, and the wolves outside will lose their teeth." To a lonely widow he met by a river, he said, "Love is not lost when a person dies. It is only returned to the place it came from." To a young warrior who sought glory in battle, he said, "The greatest victory is not in defeating others, but in mastering oneself." To a traveler burdened with regret, he said, "No path is wasted. Even the wrong turns bring you closer to where you must go." In this way, he taught without teaching. His words were gentle, simple, and sparse like leaves carried by a light breeze. They settled in the hearts of those who heard them and took root in their own time. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant peaks, Lao Tzu found himself near a quiet riverbank surrounded by tall reeds. Fireflies flickered in the gathering darkness. He sat on a smooth stone and rested, listening to the water's steady flow. He spoke softly to the river. "You move without effort. You nourish without asking. You carve through mountains without anger. You are the teacher of all teachers." The river murmured in reply, and the sage closed his eyes. "To be like you," he whispered, "is to be truly free." As night deepened, he lay down beneath the stars, using his folded robe as a pillow. He gazed up at the sky where constellations slowly wheeled overhead. The universe felt vast yet intimate, distant yet warm. "How small our lives seem," he said, "and yet each life contains the whole of the Tao." The wind rustled through the reeds. An owl hooted in the distance. The river sang its endless song, and Lao Tzu, feeling utterly at peace, surrendered to sleep. When dawn broke, he awoke to a world washed in soft light. A thin layer of mist hovered over the river, glowing faintly. He stood and stretched, then resumed walking westward. His journey continued for many days, though time no longer held meaning for him. Each sunrise was a beginning, each sunset a completion, each step a return to himself. Eventually, he reached the edge of the known world, where mountains gave way to vast plains stretching into the horizon. There were no villages here, no temples, no roads, only open land, windswept grasses, and silence. It was here that Lao Tzu stopped. He looked out at the endless expanse before him. The world felt new and ancient all at once, like the breath between thoughts. "This is the true gate," he whispered, "not the western pass, not the border of a kingdom, but the place where the self dissolves into everything." He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The wind embraced him. The earth supported him. The sky opened around him. In that moment, the sage felt no separation between himself and the world. He was the breath of the wind, the strength of the earth, the silence of the sky, the flow of the river, the stillness of the mountain, the softness of the willow, the clarity of the pond, the emptiness of the bamboo. He was, at last, the Tao. No one knows what became of him after that day. Some say he walked into the plains and never returned. Others say he dissolved into light. Others still believe he lived quietly among the Western tribes, teaching in whispers and gestures. But Lao Tzu would have smiled at all these stories, for they are all equally true and equally unimportant. Asterisk, asterisk, the sage lives not in biography, but in the space between thoughts. He lives in the moment when one stops striving and begins simply being. He lives in the silence that follows surrender. He lives in the Tao, and the Tao lives in all things. And now his journey becomes your journey. His silence becomes your silence. His peace becomes your peace. Breathe gently, listen deeply, let the world fall away. The Tao is here. The Tao has always been here, and in this quiet moment, the Tao is you.